Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining this special edition Water Talks on conspiracy theories in the New World Order for California. Just kidding. We've got to do creative things in marketing now to get everybody to join a webinar after, many months of COVID and pandemic webinars and things like that. But looking forward to discussing with you all today the new regulations that have already happened, what we've seen developed in terms of asset management planning for wet infrastructure, and specifically this new proposed legislation from California dealing particularly with sanitary sewer assets here. All right, so I'm seeing more people come in. Again, thanks for joining, everybody, and we'll go ahead and get started here. Your host today for this webinar, all Innovyze Autodesk folks. My name is Tim Medeiros. I am a solutions engineer, been with Innovyze and now a part of Autodesk for 6 years total, 1 year part of Autodesk. I've helped with many of our different software products, but have particularly found my niche in some of our asset management products, done trainings and traveled all around the world actually to help with some of our solutions here. And I'm happy to be joined again by David Topman. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. David Topman here. I am on the Innovyze executive team, but now part of kind of the Autodesk family, helping evangelize water technology throughout the entire Autodesk portfolio. Been in the water business for, over 40 years now. Prior to Innovyze, I was the Esri Global Water Industry Manager, and prior to that, led the asset management program at Colorado Springs Utilities. And so, a lot of that gets put into our vision and strategies here at Innovyze/Autodesk now, as we kind of embrace the new environment that we find ourselves, such as the new general order in California. So, yep.
Perfect. Thanks, Thanks, David. Let's see. All right. So again, just ground rules for Water Talks. Again, if you have a question, please do ask any point in here. Please do that. Put that question in the Q&A panel of Zoom webinars there. I have put in the chat a couple of things you can download, PDFs of the slides we'll be going through here today, and the draft of that general order that we'll be talking about for a good portion of the call here today. So look at the chat, you can download those, but we'll be mostly monitoring the Q&A in terms of answering folks' questions. Again, happy to be joining you all every other week here on Tuesdays for Water Talks. You can see there on the schedule some of our upcoming Water Talks. Looking at ahead, we're looking forward to partnering with Hazen and looking at some surge analysis specifically in 2 weeks. So water folks, definitely tune in for that one. Looking at some digital twin and our cloud platform Info 360 2 weeks from then. Partnering with Optimatics and looking at how Optimizer can be used within Inforx ICM, and we'll be presenting a case study there on the October 4th. And then looking at system curves and pumps within InfoWater Pro after that. So again, please do put all questions in the Q&A. Definitely looking forward to those. And the webinar will be recorded, and you'll have access to the recording of today's webinar after the event here today. Might be later in the week, but we'll get it to you all. All right. One other thing our marketing folks wanted to put out there to you all on the call here today is that Autodesk University, this is a new thing for us coming into Autodesk, being part of Innovyze, but it is a huge event. It's really geared towards learning and education. This is definitely not in any way a sales conference. It's got all these different courses and classes led by a number of different folks here, and there are specific water courses as well here. So there are about 6 courses. One of these I'll be helping with, and this was a case study that was actually presented on an earlier Water Talk earlier this summer, emergency planning using InfoWater Pro. But there are a number of water-related topics on here, and if you can't join in person down in New Orleans, there is a free free access using the digital pass there. So I just wanted to let everybody know about Autodesk University coming up. But with that, we'll go ahead and get into the topic. So for today's agenda, again, if hopefully you're as excited as my son was for his first day of school just yesterday there. Everybody's super excited for talking about legislation, new general order for California. So we'll kind of summarize past legislation, some of which we've covered here at Innovize, things that have happened in different states, on state level, at the federal level, how this has kind of grown in step with utilities and software developers, asset management tools. We'll go into detail on this new proposed general order, specifically looking at sanitary sewers within California and sensitive water bodies there. David will go into that, again, what this kind of means to you, and then we'll go into a little demo of, again, what does Innovize Autodesk offer as part of, bringing in more and more criteria that's being used for these asset management solutions, whether it's, kind of grassroots or being regulated from the top down. What do we offer to help with that? All right, so with that, I will stop sharing my screen, David, and pass it over to you.
Okay. I need to, I think, grab my.
I guess I could have given you more of a heads up there, but
perfect. Yeah, no, I got it. I got it.
Nice.
And yeah, I like your son, I thought that was a picture of me at first, getting ready for this conversation. Regulations have all been a part of my life. When I got out of school in Arizona, I went right to work for the Department of Environmental Quality as a groundwater hydrologist. So I've always been involved with regulations for many, many years, even did some water rights adjudication. So, it's been in my blood really since I started in water. So, we want to kind of talk about, as Tim mentioned, kind of we've talked about this topic in the past. And whenever I talk about, water and asset management, and I go into regulations, they're like, well, wait a minute, and when I start off in the, 1970s with the Clean Water Act, they're like, what does that have to do with asset management? Well, really all of these do, because, a fundamental element of asset management is the intent to serve, right? And we in the water industry, we distribute water and we collect sewage. And we're always about pressure and flow, and levels of service to our community. So and the thing about water is it's a quantity as well as a quality issue. So really, we owe a lot of this to our roots in the 70s with the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. In the 90s, kind of set the stage for the lead and copper rules to kind of take that into the homes, if you will. And really it was a lot about water. Well, in the 2000s, really it was sewers' turn, right? The EPA started coming out with really their sanitary sewer overflows and their capacity management operations maintenance manuals. And it was kind of like, the punitive side, but also the good side, right? CMOM was all about, if you take care of your system, it will take care of you, as in it will help mitigate SSO. So they had a balanced program for sewage. Then we really saw, the terms asset management and everything really started coming out when we, in the 2010s with Michigan, and we had the basically the SAWS program that started talking about asset management plans. Here's the one of the state websites, but then quickly thereafter, Ohio followed suit with Senate Bill number 2. And then New Jersey came in with their water quality acts. And there was really now this emphasis on asset management. We started seeing for the first time, asset management plans as being a mechanism that was kind of really an extension of CMOM, right? Is to actually codify this this framework, these workflows into documentation. In 2018, back to water, we had America's Water Infrastructure Act, and again, Innovise was there. We did a virtual boot camp. We had a 5-part series of webinars, and OWEA affected drinking water systems of 3,300 population above, and they wanted you to do a risk and resilience assessment. Now, they didn't really come out and say asset management plan, but they wanted you to start incorporating risk into your decisions, and then update, which you probably already had an ERP, but update it based on the new risk elements that you encountered in your assessment. Then really things started to heat up, in Florida with respect to sanitary sewer. In 2020, the summer of 2020, Florida passed some environmental laws that really pushed, the limits of managing sewer, and really started to take into account sewer laterals and indeed these asset management plans, and rightfully so, right? In Florida, the geology, the karst topography, the interconnectivity between groundwater and surface water is almost indistinguishable. So they really, wanted to step up their game in understanding, sanitary discharges into their water environment. And then, the big thing in the news has been the IIJA, which was passed last fall, signed by President Biden on November 15th. And here, Tim and I have done other talks on how you would say go after some of the grant money, and understanding, how do I take into account these disadvantaged communities, which is in the language. And we talked about, the social vulnerability index from the CDC as an authoritative data source. What we're really, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention just this month, the EPA has put out new guidelines on lead service line inventories as part of the lead and copper, revisions that was just released this month. But today we're here to talk about in 2022, the revised California General Order for Sanitary Sewer Systems. So really what kind of launched the content, if you will, for this discussion was the release of the proposed draft on January 31st. But this is not really all that new. They held a public workshop back in April of 2021, so almost 18 months ago, that started kind of preparing for these revisions. And then they had a public workshop on February of this year, of which, the lower right corner is the presentation that's available, on the internet, that you can freely download their presentation, of which then they were kind of seeking oral comments at their water board meeting on March 15th. And then all written comments were due by April 8th. Now, this webpage that I have the URL at the bottom is basically their portal to all things regarding the general order update. And I haven't seen too many updates lately since April. I signed up for the Lyris list manager. It's really easy. You just go in, put your name and your email, and they will update you as to when the revisions have been basically approved, right? Which then this would go into effect something like 90 days after it's been finally approved. But as it stands, we're still kind of in draft mode. The comment period's over, and we're waiting for kind of ratification, if you will, of this new general order. So why update the order? Well, the original order back in 2006, it's 16 years old. So they kind of thought, well, we better, kind of modernize this thing. They did want to acknowledge, climate change impacts, because that's definitely part of the infrastructure bill. Address, kind of the true cost of compliance, if you will. Definitely update their reporting processes, a lot more electronic submittal, even a interactive mapping for some of those submittals, clarifying, some specifics for compliance, And then, it's just they kind of needed to refresh everything because it's just everywhere in the news, right? I mean, even California spills are making the New York Times, right? And it just seems to be part of our kind of continuous news coverage, if you will, on sanitary sewer. Now, if you go to the workshop and you look at their presentation, kind of one of the most comprehensive changes, in my opinion, and this is directly from their workshop. The red is kind of the new. It's basically any discharge from the sanitary sewer or potential to discharge, and the real element is waters of the state. Right. And when we look at the federal SSOs, it's waters of the US, which are more, prominent, noticeable water bodies. But in the state of California, we've said waters of the state, which includes surface waters, so US waters, as well as non-federal surface waters, but also groundwater. So basically, almost any H2O molecule in the state of California is kind of falls under this in terms of discharge or potential discharge, where I have clean water or raw water and sewage interacting with one another. So really, comprehensive is a bit of an understatement, right? They're really wanting to know about almost any risk, anytime, anywhere. We blogged about this. You can go to the Autodesk blogs, just type in, California general order Autodesk, and this blog should pop up that I just wrote this summer. But the general order, if you kind of dissect it and go through the multiple pages, it identifies 29 threatened beneficial uses, 7 parameters of likelihood of failure, 4 sources of blockages, 7 sources of climate change impact, 6 factors of infrastructure failure, 3 components of system capacity, and 3 community-based impacts, right? We'll go into this in a little bit more detail, but this water talk could be 8 hours long to do all of that justice. So we'll give you a cursory review. I'm looking forward to the Q&A section, and of course, like anything, always feel free to contact us to take a deeper dive. We would love to talk to you about it from what we understand is going on with the general order. So when we look at beneficial use, here's 29, and there's actually over 30 different beneficial uses that you need to take a look at for impact. Of course, municipal is kind of the number one, but it gets us into all sorts of things of various habitats, and aquacultures, marine habitats, even say the groundwater recharge project. So your risk profile has just escalated in terms of what you need to look out for. Now, clearly, not every one of these is in your specific geographic location. Not every service territory has every one of these. In fact, many service territories may only have 1 or 2, but you kind of need to take these into account. So how would you do that? Well, we kind of turn to our handy dandy GIS. Our partners, our friends at Esri, we know them for their GIS software, but they have a significant data source that they provide as well. And the state of California has really embraced GIS in many different solutions. But if you're trying to understand, well, gosh, how am I as a utility employee supposed to know about rare and endangered species habitats? Well, Esri, the data team at Esri in their Living Atlas has built what they call their intact habitat cores, and that's this diagram on the left, and it's a GIS layer that basically takes a look at many different habitats, endangered species, wetlands, things of that nature, and kind of created these composite polygons of these intact habitat cores that are really non-human, made or influenced, if you will, which would then very much come under this, these 29 habitats, or areas of beneficial use you need to look for. Again, just part of your GIS that you could bring into the Innovyze solutions for risk analysis. And they're not all Esri, right? On the Esri platform, there's lots of public data sets. If you're looking at groundwater, well, the DWR themselves, they have that in the right-hand picture. All those dots, the circles, are groundwater projects. A lot of them recharge projects that are permitted by the state that you would then, I know of these various projects. But if you happen to be in Santa Clara County, you're in luck because the county has published their depth to water, in essence, depth to groundwater table, polygon layer, right? So, the warm colors such as red, basically, there's groundwater when you turn over a shovel, or at least within your, sewer main depth, in the warm colors. And then the blue colors, it's over 100 feet deep, and probably a sufficient buffer vadose protecting you, the groundwater from the sewer. So, again, that's in Santa Clara County. So make sure you look for, all the different available data sets, publicly available data sets, for the state of California. Now, there's a big section on the likelihood of an SSO in the general order, and they kind of, you should be cognizant of geology. Okay, that makes sense. And again, back to, GIS layers, but they also mean soil morphology. And we'll talk about geologic hazards a little bit more. But just understanding, design issues, construction methods, good old fashioned, material deterioration, understanding age of the system. And we've done lots of different asset management webinars at Innovyze that talk about the workflow, how you go through, in essence, what would be a digital asset management plan. And just, a lot of things that we bake into our state-of-the-art, best practice from asset management. I serve, in the American Society of Civil Engineers, as well as I'm on the US tag for ISO 55000. So we like to pride ourselves of injecting state-of-the-art asset management into our solutions. But you also need to take into account, population growth, and I'm going to suggest also population decline. But basically, this is all kind of your standard, asset management. And, again, we'll be happy to talk to you about lots of different methods that you would go about addressing the likelihood of failure of an SSO. When we talk about blockages, that's good old fashioned, fats, oils, and grease program, which I'm sure many of you have a fog program, and that would be, mapping that out where you have potentials for blockages. When you look at tree roots, many of you may not be arborists or understand, but the U.S. Forest Service in the state of California they've published on their publicly available ArcGIS Hub. They have a tree canopy for the state of California. And that's what's in the lower left corner there. It's a publicly available data set. You bring it into your GIS, but also the more detailed picture, that is indeed a view of my neighborhood. I can kind of see my house. But also, it's pretty accurate. It definitely denotes the 40-foot tall mulberry tree that I have in my front yard, which has a significant root zone, I can assure you. And so you would, for those of you that have an active CCTV program and are using NASCO standards, you would be able to kind of take that tree canopy, build yourself, in essence, a root model, and, calibrate it with any of the R codes you find, in your PACP investigation, right? So, whether it be, the different RF, RT, RM, RB codes of whether they're fine, medium, ball, taproot, that sort of thing. You could calibrate the model, and then, where you have those trees, propagate that of potential root zone intrusion. And of course, that's kind of definitely a big deal right now with the drought and all of those tree roots seeking our sewer systems for moisture. But it also gets into, all sorts of other elements of blockage. Now, system damage due to climate change impact, they're looking at sea level rise, which, in the state of California, not as much, I would think, as in the Gulf Coast or in Florida, but definitely, we're having more extreme weather events. We experience, flash flooding. So you want to make sure you have your kind of 2D hydrologic models to understand flood inundation within your area. But then also we get into some of those geologic hazards, earthquakes, landslides, like in the lower left corner, there is a slide potential polygon layer also in ArcGIS Online that you could bring in to understand potential landslide movement or moving soils, if you will, that can create damage events. Infrastructure deficiencies and failures, they make a comment. This is, again, almost classic asset management, but kind of getting into definitely the equipment side, if you will, with pump station, mechanical failures, the age-old, system age, aging infrastructure, material degradation, but also, manhole cover failures. So, cracked rings, manholes being stolen now, and art on someone's wall, but all the whole issue of structural failures and O&M, almost again back to CMOM activities. Now, that being said, we're definitely proponents of age does not equal condition. Just because a system is old doesn't mean it's in good or in bad shape. In Colorado Springs, we had, some pipe from the turn of the century, VCP sewer pipe that was laid by artisans, with love and care, that the pipe was perfect, 100 years later. And so, age does not always equal condition, because we conversely had some PVC pipe, laid in moving soils that was already going egg-shaped within, 20 years and starting to crack. So, you have to kind of get out and look at your pipe and understand its condition. Now, that being said, also, a crack does not always equal a leak. The visual inspections for NASCO are amazing, but there are newer technologies out there, even, the technology, the FEL, that can take a look at understanding, is there a potential integrity breach of the pipe wall. So, again, you kind of have to get out there and use best available technologies to take a look at, is my system actually leaking, and thus a source of a discharge, which all falls under this general order. As we keep going through all the different elements, we kind of started off the conversation with system capacity. Obviously it's understanding I&I, understanding insufficient system capacity, due to population growth. And then, of course, any other sort of, combined interconnectivity, stormwater capture, kind of going into sanitary sewer systems, overburdening some of your treatment processes. But I would also suggest that, we may have, well, it says excess system capacity, as in there's, too much pipe, if you will, or low flow conditions due to population decline, right? When we have people move out of our system, we don't have sufficient toilet flushing, which, kind of reduces a low flow environment. We don't get the scouring. We don't get, there's a delicate balance on system capacity and anticipated flow, and the various aerobic and anaerobic environments that exist, which can tend to proliferate, those root zones, right? So it's definitely a balance of understanding, flow. I need to understand the hydraulics of my system. Kind of the last but not least, they're definitely throwing in community, understanding your community, something such as power outages, as the state of Texas shown with the energy water nexus, where they lost all power and basically they lost their water because they couldn't turn on pumps. And that becomes definitely an issue with sewage as well, especially force mains, and where we're trying to pump water, sewage up and over hills, when we fail, when gravity can no longer be sufficient, right? And we have to use pumping. So there's that sort of relationship between power and water. And then just vandalism, understanding, illegal dumping in your manholes, things of that nature. And then, with the digital boom also comes, lots of cable being laid and, the various contractor or third party damage events that you kind of need to understand from a risk perspective. Last, we kind of referenced equity. The FPL is more like in water with rates, but the EPA kind of is doing some revisions on their financial capability assessments because all of this costs money. We don't always have as much money as we need, so they're adjusting some of their guidelines. But there's also other indices out there like the Alice Index from the United Way. Tim and I have talked about the Social Vulnerability Index from the CDC, but just released this summer, the EPA has put out new sources on actually how to define a disadvantaged community. So it's great free documentation from the EPA if you're having some challenges defining what a disadvantaged community means within your service territory. And also you can kind of turn back to Esri. They have kind of the official, if you will, Justice 40 polygons, that declare disadvantaged communities according to the White House Justice 40 initiative. Last but not least, I kind of like to talk about, the sewer system management plans. And these have been around for a long, long time, right? So this general order is really going to be asking you to kind of update your SSMP. And what they're acknowledging is that at least the scale and complexity of the SSMP matches the scale and complexity of your system. Right. And that kind of makes sense. Smaller systems, you have a moderate SSMP, where very large scaled complex systems, you're going to have a much more complex SSMP. Just like CMOM, they want you to make sure you have provisions for the management, operation, and maintenance of the system. Makes sense. But now they're really emphasizing prioritizing system repairs and maintenance based on risk. So you have to have risk-based decision-making requirements in your SSMP now, from as guidance from the general order. And probably the most intriguing and potentially, the most conversational piece must have implementation of current standard industry practices through available equipment. So that would probably be the latest cleaning nozzles, but also we're starting to get into with technology, smart manhole covers, right? Having real-time telemetry on flow, having the latest software, right? That does risk-based modeling for your asset management plan, right? All of these feed into strategies for proactive system operation and maintenance. And not only, with proactive, we've got past preventive into predictive, but we're now doing prescriptive, right? And using artificial intelligence as pretty much an industry practice, right, for recommended maintenance of, say, lift stations and treatment plants. So, standard industry practice has really elevated its game lately, and even getting us to obviously into cloud technologies and all of that as kind of standard industry practice. And all that then feeds into your local program management. So probably more than bit sensory overload at the moment. Again, the general order is freely available. You can download. Would love to talk to you folks. We can go into more detail on how our thoughts about that. But I think I am now going to turn this over to Tim, and he's kind of show you kind of some of the things that we have in our solutions. Tim?
Perfect. Thanks, David. And as I'm starting up here, I'll start sharing my screen. There were a couple questions that came in as you were presenting that if you had anything to add, I answered in the chat, but if you had anything you wanted to add, there's a question on, again, those climate change factors there. And then a question on the ArcGIS online data. Is this only available in California or elsewhere? I guess if you're looking at those, if anything you wanted to add to those?
Yeah, sure. So the ArcGIS online data sets, are they available, for the country? Well, of course, I worked at Esri for many years. I was responsible for getting the soil corrosivity into ArcGIS online, basically understanding deterioration. and they have massive data sets for the entire planet. I mean, I used to say that the Living Atlas was the asset registry of planet Earth. And so it is available. Many of those are global, if not national. And, California, as progressive as we've been, tend to have some of the more comprehensive data sets, if you will, in response to the general order. So it's not an exact answer, but yes, data does exist. I can't speak to how much of that is available in other states. But it's definitely, California is rich with data, and you just need the tools to analyze it and put it to work for yourself. Now, more detail about the 7 sources of climate change impact. Yeah, Tim, why don't we do a demo and we can kind of address that more in the Q&A session. Okay.
Perfect. Sounds good to me. Just got a question in about transcript of this presentation. I'll look into that. But you'll definitely have access to the recording will be sent, and you should have the PDF as well as the actual proposed general order. We're both linked as PDFs in the chat for this presentation, so you can download those there. But with that, kind of going off that last question, we've got a little bit of a demonstration. Again, how does this apply to you all? What can you do with this information? What information is available for you now to add to your models? And what does Innovyze Autodesk offer is kind of a little bit we'll be finishing up with here. So a couple of examples of some of the stuff we're talking about. How can you access some of this, our alliance partner, Esri data. So, here is a worldwide, or I guess it's just US, detailed water bodies map. So here's my hometown, and they've got the lake that I sometimes run around. So that's, again, freely accessible to you. Here is, if we look at Living Atlas that David was just mentioning there, here's the CDC vulnerability index. And you can see that this is even available to download and export to whatever you need to. And we talked about this in a previous webinar about how, again, with every piece of legislation, there's a different area of emphasis. So for the IIJA, looking at this and, applying for state revolving fund money, this could be a particularly beneficial data source to use for that grant application we mentioned there. And then today, we'll be looking at is specifically in this California order. It really focused in on, and David touched on it at the beginning, water bodies, right? I think there were 29 different water body kind of data sources listed, right? And we talked about earlier how varied those were, David, if you had a couple examples top of mind.
Yeah, so those are just those threatened habitats, if you will, right? And so, any overlay of any of those potential threatened habitats on a water body and your service territory, specifically where you have sewer mains, gravity mains, any discharge, you've hit the trifecta, right?
Yeah.
Of it's potentially reaching a water of the state, and it's in one of these threatened beneficial use areas that you need to make sure you're incorporating into your decision-making process.
Yeah. And I think included in that list are things you might not potentially think of. Like maybe you as a utility or as a consultant working with the utility already have a general idea of, okay, here's where my rivers are, here's where my lakes are. But some of it was like, tribal areas or something was counted as a water body. There's a lot more categories that you might not be aware of. So I guess the example we're going through today is how you can bring more of these kind of water body areas that you might not initially have access to into your kind of asset planning model there. So yeah, so this is an example here, again, kind of relating to that last question. Again, you can search all of ArcGIS Online instead of just your group, your ArcGIS Online group, if you filter this off. So here I'm able to search, found this water features layer that fits for the network I'm going to be looking at and analyzing, and added this data set to, again, my Info 360 asset platform software that I am managing to, again, bring in all of these different components, right? That as new legislation comes in, as new factors become either necessary or become obviously beneficial for my risk model, I'm able to easily kind of add those in here. So here is an Innovyze product, Info 360 asset, all cloud-based, very accessible. And I guess the example we'll be going through is just how able to bring in that additional water feature into the software and add it to my risk analysis here. So very briefly, here's my map here. And I can see I've got all these background different data sets here. And maybe before I was really looking at, and I'm going to switch my background here to make this a little more obvious, but maybe before I was looking at just this, right? I had my rivers and streams and then wetlands added to my map, and I was doing risk analysis based on that information. When I downloaded that and had access to this new ArcGIS Online, I realized, oh wow, there's a lot more water bodies here that that are under increased scrutiny due to something like the general order that I might want to pay attention to. So quickly being able to add that in and then seeing how that could affect my overall model and risk analysis might be critically important, right? So and becomes pretty obvious. It's beneficial that the more data you have, the better, I suppose. All right, so if I wanted to add this to my overall risk analysis, and I know for some folks on here, this is probably preaching to the choir if you've used some of our software in the past, if you've done this basic risk analysis in the past, this is pretty familiar to you all, but again, just showing the ease of use within something like Info 360 asset. Here I'm at my consequence of failure setup. So if we think of likelihood combined with consequence of failure gives you risk. I'm looking at consequence of failures for how bad will it be if I've got some discharge, hopefully accidental to one of these bodies of water, right? So right now I'm just looking at rivers and streams in that wetlands layer, but say we want to add that new component that we just brought in here. Caps lock on. Can easily kind of add that, start to give it different values. We had a presentation earlier, I think it was last year, on how creek crossings were particularly, that was a higher risk. You want to definitely highlight those areas where you might have an immediate discharge in case you had a break over a creek crossing, for example. So here, if it's that sanitary sewer is right over that body of water, that's giving it a score of 10. And I'll say if it's within 50 feet here, 100 feet, score of 9, 7 respectively, 250, I'll say 500, just throwing out numbers here, 100 or 1,000 for this last one here. So once that's created, I now have that natural water features created here. I could balance these out, rebalance these so that, this one is more all-encompassing, it looks like on my map. So maybe I make that 70% of the weighing for this particular category, and I drop these down to 15. It'd probably be most accurate for me to do something like use the highest score as the overall category score, right? So if my pipe 1 gets a score of 10 for rivers and streams and somehow 0 and 0 for these two, the final score that's going to be ranked as 30% of the overall consequence of failure is going to be this rivers and streams going to be given a 10. So this is probably actually the most accurate way to represent this. So I'll go ahead and do that. And now I see within my, I'm going to save that change there. I see in my risk setup that is added in here. Hold on, let me double check that weighing I did here. Yep, should be that. And I will go ahead and run that risk analysis, and we'll see how that changes the overall risk rating for some of my assets here. So once that risk analysis is run, maybe for some an asset like this pipe here, we could see the kind of history of how this pipe's risk grade has changed, right, over time. So here are the past risk analysis that I've run. We can see how that's changed based on my criteria, adding something like a ArcGIS Online, Living Atlas data source or not, including one has changed that risk analysis over time for each of my assets there. All right. All right, so this is just a quick example that specifically I think relates to this general order that is very interested in, again, 29, 30 different water body types and really evaluating those for consequence of failure, maybe more deliberately. This is just an example of, again, more regulations will likely be coming, right? As different events happen or reviews to previous legislation occur, there'll be different areas of emphasis, and it's good to have a method to quickly add and kind of cover yourself when those areas of emphasis are added, and that relates to where you might be. All right, so with that, go ahead and exit that here. Were there any questions, David, that you saw come in the chat?
Yeah, and I'm answering one right now that we'll talk a little bit about. And I'll here, let me answer this. So we just had one about resilience, but I think let's kind of go into the parting thoughts, and then we'll jump a little bit more into the Q&A, because I say it's to me the most fascinating piece. So basically you saw Tim kind of demonstrate we're bringing into our Info 360 environment, we're bringing the various pieces of information. You're doing analyses to help generate decisions, and the one of the things that is kind of inherent to the cloud then is the collaborative nature, right? Because what we're finding is, and per the general order, is getting this information to all stakeholders, right? So it's not just a select few in the organization. This information has to be made available to all parts of the organization. And I'm not necessarily saying public, right? Although some choose to expose elements of that to the public as well, per transparency and accountability. But getting, engineering talking to operations talking to public affairs, if you will, to understand how all aspects of a system come together, right? And so part of that, our kind of parting thoughts, if you will, is this is all just good asset management, right? The general order seems daunting. It's like, oh my gosh, how could I ever do this? Well, you start by tackling the very first risk with the very first threatened beneficial use, and you build from there, right? I think that's what the California Water Board is seeking, is that you are all being proactive and trying to quantify risk. And that doesn't mean you're going to get all 29 beneficial uses, all 7 failure modes, everything all at once. It's a journey, right? The organization needs to make these decisions and start configuring them, and you can prove due diligence by you're on the journey, right? So as Tim's comment there, what good asset management includes and emphasizes continues to evolve. And that's why I say, as we learned from ISO 55000, which just had some recent changes, as it continues to evolve from our global understanding of climate impact, what does that come into play? So all these things are, it's a journey and continues to change. That's the beauty of cloud software too, right? You go home on Friday, you come in Monday, and you have all of a sudden new functionality. And so, that's one of the things that we're starting to experience with cloud implementations. I acknowledge that some people don't like the word climate change, but no one can deny extreme weather, right? We are experiencing extreme events, extreme drought, extreme flood. So getting your hydrologic 2D model, flood model ready is always a good idea to understand what's going to happen with some of these, torrential rain downfalls in these very short periods, right? Long gone are the good old days of the nice slow drizzle, right, that we could capture. We're now getting these more extreme events, and we have to understand what that means. Definitely with all the conversations, disadvantaged communities, however you define that should be in your risk model. And there's lots of different sources that you can draw upon if you don't have your own. And, whenever I talk asset management, we always talk about, structural failure and fatigue and aging infrastructure and all that science. But, don't forget assets can fail due to capacity, either oversized or undersized, right? And so understanding your hydraulic model, that is, to me, a fundamental requirement of any good asset management system, right? So knowing your flow and knowing your risk. It's Tim, I'm a bit pleased and scared of your cartoon there.
I love this meme. I feel like a lot of people relate to this meme, and it does relate to asset management because I think regulations like this happen because I think just as human beings, we have this tendency where we know that something's a problem, but it's hard to get moving on some of those solutions to these problems. So I think so many people relate to this because we know again that there are these asset management related issues within our different networks. We have this tendency we know that, but we want it to just be fine. So I just thought I'd include as a parting thought here at the end.
Yeah. So this, like I say, the general order is quite comprehensive. It's a bit daunting, but again, you just start tackling it one element at a time, and before you know it, you're establishing your due diligence to the intent of the general order. We're going to go back to some of these questions, and I think let's go back to the there are email addresses. Feel free to reach out. The question about climate impact, California, like I say, if we were doing this water talk specifically to Florida, or say New Orleans, Louisiana, sea level rise is very much an issue, and the king tides on the East Coast are getting stronger, and it's so flat out there that, only a couple inches difference has huge inland impacts, for sea level rise. So in California, we're kind of, on the other coast, but for us, clearly, we are getting the flash flooding, we are getting the wildfires, we are getting, obviously we're known for our earthquakes and landslides and subsidence in the Central Valley. So those, again, in terms of, are they, to me, it's just kind of Mother Earth doing its thing, right? And they're, for the state of California, we have lots of great GIS data sets that, known active fault zones, the landslide polygon layer I showed you, subsidence, basically, terrain that is susceptible to subsidence, wildfire, interchanges. All of these things are typically available, as GIS data sets. So, just incorporating all that risk, even wildland fire, you'd wonder, well, what risk is it to a sewer system? Well, again, if it takes out any of your electricity, your pump stations, it can wreak havoc with your system. And so understanding wildfires is also, and tends to be just a watershed quality issue, debris issue, back to I&I, if you have, damaged, inflow guards, all that can come pouring into your sanitary sewer system as well. So it's kind of like, how everything is all connected. So I'm not sure, hopefully that answers a little bit more on the climate change impact. But again, for California, it's just, we are in a very active state, and so lots of things going on there. There was one other question, Tim, that we were going to answer. Oh, the combined sewers. I answered that one, and so yes, right. It applies to sanitary sewer and in essence combined sewer, although we don't have a whole lot of combined sewer in California other than San Francisco is probably our major population center that has that by design back in the day. But really the answer in essence is yes, and it's more on the sanitary sewer, right? So it's not about storm water getting into the sewer, sanitary sewer, it's sanitary sewer getting out. And through surcharging events, where a discharge of sanitary sewer from any conveyance, is what the general order is all about, right? And the environmental impact based on these threatened beneficial uses and the categories of failure that we talked about. So, that might be, say, a question, a much more relevant question as we move east. Where combined sewer is more of the norm. Let's see if we have any other open.
Roxanne notes in here that Sacramento has combined sanitary sewer as well.
Yeah. So again, it kind of the general order is in reference to sanitary sewer, and it's more of the sanitary into the storm than it is storm into the sanitary, other than increased discharge capabilities. Let's see. We have any other questions?
One more on resilience, if you wanted to expand on that.
Oh, yeah. Good question on, Info 360 asset, you're showing the risk model, the classic COF, LOF, and how would you incorporate resilience? And my quick answer, we can expand a little bit on that, the big words out there now are resilience and sustainability, and how does asset management respond to that, right? How do you cover those things? Well, they're part and parcel, they're related to one another, but they're not exactly the same, right? Sustainability is, can I continue to operate, right? So I have an economic sustainability, I have an environmental sustainability, lots of elements that go into sustainability of, can I continue to operate? And I'm trying to minimize impact as I move forward and be sustainable. And folks are trying to get to these, net zero insert, parameter of choice. That's a kind of a long-term capital O&M sort of programmatic response. Resilience, right? Resilience is that, kind of response, build back, rebound from some sort of catastrophic event. And that can even be an economic event. It can be a pandemic. It can be, major earthquake, right? So resilience is, how do I respond? How do I recover, if you will, from a major event? And the way we would do that in Info 360 Asset is to build a scenario, right? You would want to understand, what is my major risk that I need to be resilient for, or against, right? So it would be, if I had a seismically active area where a major conveyance crosses, should I have a major, earthquake of 5, 6, 7, and I lose that line, what is the risk of that? And what is my mitigation to recover from that? Can I do bypass pumping? Do I have any sort of inline storage capabilities? Can I discharge to a nearby catchment and contain and treat later? Is that catchment lined so it doesn't discharge into the groundwater, right? So resilience, really is, we've been doing this for decades as scenario planning. And so you would want to make sure you had different scenarios of the different types of risk. Lots of folks are trying to get into these multi-factor resilience scenarios, which, that's good, but also sometimes difficult to explain as you get into the Boolean logic of and ors and those sorts of things. So lots of times it's build a scenario for a specific resilience event, if you will, prepare for that, develop a mitigation plan, choose the next resilience event, build a model, look at your mitigation plan, and kind of store these as scenarios. So we have this concept of live risk, which is great for daily O&M. We have this concept of digital asset management plans, which really feeds into, daily operations. No one wants a live capital projects plan just because capital projects requires lots of, the funding and the capital expenditures and the planning. You don't have a real-time capital, management plan or CIP, but for O&M you would. So again, with some of these things, having live risk is great for understanding, real-time risk of, say, items of the general order. I have new inspection records. I can elevate something, it jumps to the top of the risk profile. I respond, that's good due diligence. But when it comes to, say, capital planning, you have your more, period of, 1 to 3 to 5 to 10 year capital plans, if you will, of more long-term expenditures. So it's always a balancing act of near-term, long-term, and risk scenarios. Long-winded answer, but I hopefully that kind of gets, resilience is there's no singular best practice model that you plug into a solution to do resilience. It's typically an organizational response to unforeseen events, and you plan accordingly.
Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, David. I don't see any other questions out there, but thanks again, everybody, for joining. We managed to fill up the whole hour. Thought we might go a little short, but we did it. Who knew? We'll be sure to send out the PDFs and the recording. I hear some folks might not have access to those. We'll be sure to send those out in an email afterwards. And one thing I forgot to mention, if you have a water story to tell, if you'd like to be featured in one of these water talks, please do reach out and let us know. Thanks, David. And thanks everybody for joining.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.
Have a good one. Bye all.